but there are three entities I'd like to call out in specific. One is SDI, which is Scottish Development International. The other would be the panelists themselves, and I guess that would be representing 5 entities. And then also, once again, to acknowledge Glasgow Caledonian University. They are here on the ground as of September 26th with the opening ceremony. We are very honored that the president is here today, and we are thrilled at this burgeoning, flourishing relationship with GCU. So without further ado, I am going to introduce the panelists, and it's going to happen, I guess, alphabetically. And there's been one change. Malcolm Campbell was unable to leave Scotland, and so we are in his stead happily welcoming Alan Bain to the panel. And Alan also wears many hats. 2 that are immensely relevant to this discussion are, one, that he, if you will, rescued and is part owner of Carloway Mill Harris Tweed, and thus is deeply immersed in textiles. And he is also the chairman of the American Scottish Foundation. And in his role as such, I guess, some of these conversations took place, but as is the case with all wonderful relationships, friendships grow, and so consequently, that is our first panelist. Our second, John Glenn, sales director of Alex Begg and Company, which he joined in 2009. And John was at the party last night wearing a blue tie with white on it, and his kilt was red. And he was explaining to me the differences in the way ripple cashmere is addressed according to color, because, of course, the different dyes, all natural, affect the textiles in different ways, and the artisans understand this. Then Wendy Murray, Sales and Business Development Director, MYB Textiles, and also was present last night. MYB is the only producer and there's an image of it in your brochure, of a machine, the 100-year-old Nottingham lace loom. It's in your brochure on the Saturday panel. And MYB is also very involved with and committed to Madras. I really am trying to be brief on these. Then we have Brian Wilton, and Brian has to be one of the most elegant men I think I have ever seen. He is the director of the you wear the mantle well. He is the director of the Scottish Tartans Authority, and for those of you that were present last night, you heard a bit about the authority and the role that it plays. And we have for sale out front his book on tartan, which is quite a fine volume. And our moderator, I hope I have not forgotten anyone, because I'm missing a piece of paper. And our moderator, pardon? Oh my God almighty, Dougal Munro, how could I forget this gem of a human? Dougal Munro is president of Holland and Sherry. That is a title. Right? Right? Did I make a mistake? And, but that is a title, and titles, like jobs, morph depending on who either holds the title or holds the job. And he has been immersed in textiles for his entire life, third generation, I believe, and so he is an absolute font of wisdom. And our moderator is Brian Duffy, and I had the privilege of also introducing him last night. He was the head of Ralph Lauren Europe, and then founded Duffy Investments, and they invest and consult in luxury concerns. He has a deep commitment and interest in and to Scottish textiles, artisanry, and tradition, and thus we could not have a better moderator. Additionally, he received an honorary doctorate last year from Glasgow Caledonian University, and he is also on the faculty of GCU, and consequently that brings our two organizations closer, but also attests to the depth and breadth of his knowledge. During the breaks, you will see that there is a table out front that also has several books on Scotland, quite beautiful, that are there for your perusal, and they can be pre-ordered. And additionally, and they were moved, but there's a book, there's Brian's book, and then there's a book on Scottish country houses that Betty and Fieldstone have. So without further ado, I would like to ask our very distinguished panelists to come up and take us to a wonderful place. And so we look forward to this. And a hearty welcome to all from GCU who are present. We are so glad you are with us.
Thank you, Lisa. Delighted to hear you were all eating haggis last night. That makes you honorary Scottish. It means you should all understand what we're saying for a start. It doesn't take much for us to claim you as Scottish. You only have to fly over Scottish airspace and we'll claim you as one of ours. We're all delighted to be here, and thank you, Lisa, for the invitation. On behalf of all of the panel here and myself, we're here to talk about our favourite subjects, which is Scotland and Scottish textiles. We do hope you can understand everything that we say, but in the event we don't, we've got some pretty pictures and probably some volunteers to translate. So we heard a great deal yesterday, and I thought it was a fantastic programme yesterday, and just about everything that was presented, I found some Scottish connection. And Simon, who presented, who I thought was the funniest guy in the world, by the way, Simon, who presented first thing in the morning. He said, quite rightly, there's a big resurgence in Scottish fashion and Scottish fabrics, and we should shout about it more, which is exactly what we're here to do. The fashion panel, who talked with great authority later on, talked about icons and the need for everlasting patterns and looks, and that's very much what we're all about. We heard from Maeve, a Scottish designer, Celtic designer in the platinum, which was great. And Jack Ogden actually told me that there was platinum in Scottish rivers. And if that word gets out, there'll be nobody working anywhere else. And the only one I struggled a bit with was Bulgari, but then I remembered it was actually tea, and Sir Henry Lipton was Scottish, who was a great tea baron. So
there you go.
I managed to get a connection there somewhere. So Scottish textiles are all about iconic status. We're about craft and artistry that's passed through generations. We're about authenticity and real. There's nothing pretentious at all about. We hate pretension, in fact. And from a commercial standpoint, it probably retards us a little. We can be very shy about what we have to say, today being the obvious exception. But we're very authentic. It's very much about heritage and about history. And then the two key ingredients that really, we believe, make us so special as the Scottish people and the Scottish country, our landscape and our culture. The last thing, I didn't mention the watchmakers yesterday, but we heard this fantastic story about how watches were getting made mechanically over 100 years ago. While that was happening in Geneva and Zurich, this was happening in Harris and various other places around Scotland. We are very much steeped in real tradition and real artistry and craft that's passed down through the generations. And the great-grandfathers, no doubt, of these men were doing exactly what they are doing today some 100 years ago. We're very grateful to our neighbours, and by that we don't mean the English. We've got nothing to be grateful to them for. We of course mean the sheep that we live amongst. There are 8 million sheep in Scotland and 5 million people. So if there's ever a sheep revolution, we're going to be outnumbered. There's every breed of sheep in the world is represented in Scotland, and in fact there are some breeds that are unique to Scotland in the Shetland Isles. This is a particularly good-looking sheep, as I'm sure you can. He was very happy to be photographed, knowing that it was going to be shown here in New York City. The annual value of our textile and fashion business is around 1.6 billion US. I got the number of 350 companies, but John was correcting me earlier and saying that he believes there is as many as 600 companies involved in Scotland in textiles, employing more than 10,000 people. It sounds a lot, but when we compare ourselves to Italy and we compare the proportion of our economy that depends on textiles, we're nowhere near an Italian equivalent. Our business is improving. We're outperforming the overall economy overall, and Scotland is in fact outperforming the UK economy. But we all believe that we should be multiplying the representation of textiles in Scotland, not just increasing. We are the home of wonderful patterns that have really endured over the generations and centuries. The top left is a paisley pattern, one of the most common patterns you would see in gentlemen's ties, or in this case in home furnishings. Paisley is a town right next to Glasgow, which is my hometown. Bottom left is a beautiful Harris tweed check, or plaid as you would call it. The bottom right is Fair Isle, and the Fair Isle is part of the Shetland Islands out in the North Atlantic. And again, a beautiful contemporary pattern that you would see today, but it's hundreds of years old. And the top right, of course, is the symbol of our national identity, and that's tartan. And it's wonderful that we have Brian Wilton here, honestly the world's expert, to talk about tartans. He told me yesterday there's around 5,000 tartans, and he's going to speak about each one shortly. We also produce some wonderful fibres and fabrics. It's predominantly all about wool when it gets down to it. The wool does obviously directly make our wonderful knitwear, and in turn it goes into the wonderful tweeds that we have. That's a Lovat tweed in the bottom right, and a Harris tweed, Lovat tweed bottom left, Harris tweed bottom right. We also produce cashmere. We don't have cashmere goats. They're all in Asia, in China, but we bring in the raw cashmere and we treat it in Scotland. And it uniquely benefits from the softness of the water that, on one hand, produces the wonderful taste of whiskey, and on the other hand, produces the wonderful soft feeling of our cashmeres. We have fantastic design and a huge focus and priority on design with all of our universities and schools. Glasgow School of Art is a wonderful source of very successful design talent, as is Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh. They have a campus in the borders of Scotland in Hawick. And Glasgow Caledonian, that you heard about earlier, where I'm a visiting professor, put a huge emphasis on fashion and textiles, both locally in Glasgow and their fantastic campus that they have in London. And now we're delighted that we'll be doing the same here in New York. This is the real talent of Scotland, men in kilts, as you can see. I don't know if many of you men out there have worn a kilt, but it's a hugely liberating experience. And it makes you very attractive to women. Women that wouldn't have looked at you for 2 minutes, once you put the kilt on, they really can't get enough. These are very contemporary looks, and I think they all look fantastic. The wee leather number on the far outside is only one I've got a bit of doubt about. I don't think you'd catch me in that. But I think the other looks that are there are all fantastic. The question's always asked whenever you talk about kilts, what's worn under the kilt? And I'll tell you, my mother and father, who are Mary and Joseph, by the way, which explains everything. They're still around, and my dad was in the Highland Light Infantry, who wore the kilt as part of their uniform. And whenever they went out, this is before the war, when they were billeted in England, whenever they went out for an evening in their uniform, the sergeant major actually had a mirror on the floor, and they had to stand over the mirror and demonstrate, in fact, that they were not wearing what they should not have been wearing. So the question of what's worn beneath the kilt is there's nothing worn beneath the kilt. It's all in perfect working order. The real talent of Scotland today is the design talent. We're really blessed with a wonderful generation of designers. We have here Christopher Kane. It's wrong to call Christopher an up-and-coming. He's really someone who's arrived. His label was recently invested in by the Gucci Group. He's there getting his award as the Scottish Designer of the Year. Just last week he won the UK award as the Women's Wear Designer of the Year. In the middle is Jonathan Saunders, also a recipient of the UK awards regularly, as is Graham Black on the far right. So three fantastic designers out of a number that in fact are doing very, very well in the international fashion. The other great thing about them is when photographed, they all tilt to the right, which makes this look very congruous. There's a lot of great stories to talk about, a lot of great heritage in Scotland technically, but there's a lot of great emotion that comes with our heritage as well. And as you'll hear from Brian and others, that every tartan has a story associated with it. It can be a story of valour or of bravery or of defence of our country or perhaps defence of a family. But there's so much rich emotion and story that comes with the heritage of Scotland. It can be valour, it can be romance. We're a very romantic people. You can hear it in our songs, in our poetry. And here was just two people wandering through the Scottish countryside who just managed to fall in love there and then, inspired by the countryside around them. Within the tartans, there's a lot of romantic stories, many examples of Mick Romeo and Mick Juliet stories that have happened over the years. We couldn't really do this without something of Braveheart. And although Mel Gibson's maybe not the most popular guy these days, he did more for the image of Scottish men than many generations that had gone before him. One huge inspiration for Scottish textiles is the Scottish landscape. We do have extraordinary weather. We statistically have the most variable climate in the Northern Hemisphere. It has all sorts of influences. It has the Arctic and the Arctic Ocean. It has the Atlantic and the Atlantic winds. It has the Gulf Stream. There are beaches in Scotland that have palm trees on them because of the effect of the Gulf Stream. I wouldn't want to oversell the palm trees too much. If you go there looking for a Caribbean experience, you might be a wee bit disappointed. And of course, we have the landscape of the country. It's a very, very narrow country, but very high and very rugged. And it creates clearly physical circumstances in which you have to develop textiles and clothing to resist the wind and the rain and the weather, some of which we'll hear about shortly. And also the sheer drama of the landscape clearly has been a source of inspiration for design and development. You have the rugged and wild landscape, and then you have the sheer physically gorgeous landscape of the lochs and the mountains. This is Loch Lomond. The biggest loch in Scotland is Loch Ness, that I'm sure you've heard of. If you took all the water of all of the lakes and lochs in the rest of the UK and put it in Loch Ness, you would only half fill Loch Ness. That's how deep and how significant Loch Ness is. There is a monster there, of course. We've all personally seen it. It doesn't always show up for American tourists, but I do assure you that it is there. So we think there's a lot that goes into what's very, very special about the iconic nature of Scottish textiles. It's been recognised in catwalks. We heard about Karl Lagerfeld yesterday and how much of an influence he is on today's world, how much of an icon he is. Slightly oversold. I think I could design Chanel. It's pretty much just interpreting what Coco came up with a few generations ago. But he's clearly a very inspirational man, and he took his inspiration for the last season, the last autumn-winter season from Scotland, both with olive tweeds, with cashmeres, and with tartans. This is my old boss, Ralph Lauren, with an interior, and he loved plaids, regularly featured the black watch plaids in a lot of what he did, and it was a huge feature in Ralph Lauren interiors and in Ralph Lauren fashion. And then, interestingly, we were just hearing about Alexander McQueen earlier, and here he is. He regularly featured Scottish themes in his collections. He himself wasn't Scottish, but his father was. His father was a Scottish taxi driver. But Alexander McQueen himself was a London boy, but obviously very, very conscious of his Scottish roots. What we saw is very old and historic patterns are still clearly very, very relevant today. And here we have ferrules looking really beautiful on this wee girl. And here we have cashmeres looking, very beautiful on this big girl. We really do feel that everything that we have to offer today is very contemporary and very ready for a development. We now have a short video, a 5-minute video that I'm going to show before passing over to the panelist questions.
Vise de har Hudgan Hill, Via Shine the Coro, Gossen Orpo, Hudgan Hill, Moro, Huko, Huko, then a Milan more, Via Shine the Coro, Huko, then a Milan more, Moro, Huko, nach the Fahren Licht, Via Shine the Coro, nach the Fahren Licht, Moro, Huko, Kursias oro huko huko de shon rije de fon vlocht huko via shine de koro lava rije de go.
Where do you want to go? So now passing over to our panel of experts here. I've got some prepared questions, and then we'll also take some questions at the end. So I want to start with John Glenn of Beggs. So John, with your experience, why do you find customers are now coming to Scotland for luxury textiles?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who were fortunate enough to be at Holland & Sherry's showroom last night, you will all know the answer to that question, which is, of course, whisky. I don't know if you discuss with other panel members, but the list of companies that we all deal with, you'll find one strong theme running through them, that all the buyers love whisky. But although I kind of joke, whisky, kilts, haggis shortbread, or Robert Burns, are all examples of our kind of long-standing history and heritage. And you'll find that textile production in Scotland is woven into our history. And this is really what underpins all of our brands and provides the authenticity of what we do. You'll find that with a lot of the imagery that you've seen just now, and especially with articles such as tartan that we produce, these imageries are very, very strong, and hence why they're copied and reproduced the world over. But I find personally that our customers come to us because we provide a certain level of authenticity, but we also provide very good communication, levels of service, and a huge amount of passion. You'll find that in Scottish Textiles, price comes very far down the pecking order as to what we look at in our production. First and foremost in this day and age, it's innovation, and the kind of prime, I suppose the prime indicator as to the success of that is the fact that as an industry body, we're turning over more this year than we did last year, and new designs across our group of companies accounts for 24% of our turnover.
Great. And actually, just before I go on to the next question, I was wondering, Brian, if I could just insert one. Maybe if you could explain to the audience the difference between, if there is a difference between plaid and tartan.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Before I do that, just going back to your reference to the English, I really have to leap to their defence very quickly, and let you know that most of my best wives were English, and that's not a joke.
So plaid and tartan.
Plaid and plaidure. It was Winston Churchill who, talking about America and Britain, who referred to them as two great nations united or separated by a common language. And I think this is a very good example. We say catwalk, you say runway, we say tomato, and you say tomato. Plaid over here means tartan. Plaid in Scotland, the word comes from the Gaelic plaidure, which means a blanket. A great blanket, and this was the forerunner of the kilt.
great. And Dougal, as we heard, your family have been in Scottish textiles for many generations. You yourself for an unbelievable almost 40 years. Is there one key aspect of fine woven Scottish textiles above all others that you consider the most important to maintain our rich heritage?
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who were with us last night, thank you for being there. We had a grand time, didn't we? And parties are the success of parties are driven by the people who attend. The facilitators really set it up. So it was you who made it successful, so thank you. An interesting question, and one which I've actually prepared quite well for, so excuse me for reading from my notes to some extent, because I think it's a very, very important question. It defines what we need to be today and where we're going in the future as Scottish textile manufacturers, producers, creators. Let's start with the term heritage itself. I am blessed to have been born and brought up, raised, as we say here in America, in Scotland, the most beautiful small country in the world, with its own distinct customs and rich history. Most Scots, as we are known, share a great passion for our common heritage. From a Scottish textile point of view, I was immersed in this sense of heritage with a great sense of pride, handed to me by my father, who was following in his father's and his grandfather's footsteps in a Scottish wool textile business in Edinburgh. However, this was not just pride, and here we get to the important part. It was and must always be a sense of responsibility. A responsibility to use our inherited resources of available raw material, technical ability, the skill of the people who work with us, and their ability to create beautiful woven and knitted cloth and garments that embody the purity of the past, in other words, our heritage, with the finest natural raw materials of wool in many levels of quality, as Brian has alluded to, cashmere and other noble natural fibers, but most importantly, to make products that are relevant and very attractive while maintaining the highest standards of quality in design first and manufacturing to satisfy the need, the appetite of a global consumer market that changes, of course, increasingly quickly in the world we live in today. We have to be innovative, as John put, in our design, our creation of yarn and weaving. We have to respond effectively to the wishes of the marketplace, the consciousness of an increasingly discerning consumer, while recognizing that our rich heritage, our creative ability, and our remarkable skills are fully engaged and in no way compromised. Commercial expediency dictates, in addition to all that which I've mentioned, that price must be right for the global markets that we sell in. And there I have used the word sell. Here we are, arts and innovation, but that commercial expediency needs to raise its head for us to be sustainable in the future. Ultimately, every successful and self-sustaining business is about sales and profits. Like it or not, that's the reality. Scotland is a high labour cost country like virtually all of Europe. So what is the answer? It is to use the finest of natural resources, excel in innovation and exclusive design in relatively small quantities compared to mass marketing, making our authentic heritage and romance a focal point of our marketing and presentation. In this respect, aiming at the very highest level of luxury in the market is essential. The exclusive couture market. I absolutely adored Anne's presentation. Thank you so much. The bespoke tailoring market. the highest level of the interior design market for residential and hospitality, and much more, but always at the most elevated level of luxury. This must always involve partnering with the most talented fashion designers in our own home of Scotland to exemplify our capabilities together. Thank you.
I wonder if our questions were going to be enough to fill the time, but I can see it's not going to be a problem. Wendy, to you, what's the importance of design and innovation, and do you feel Scotland's producing the design talent that your business needs today?
Good morning, everyone. After Dougal's eloquent response, I have got a page of handwritten notes that now I realise I can't read, so I'm just going to go with it. I think that innovation is definitely important. No product is ever perfect or finished, and the market, as Dougal said, it's always adapting, it's always changing, and we need to make sure that we're making products that are relevant to that market. Scottish textiles mills, they pride themselves on making luxury products that are niche, they're filled with heritage and craft, but in building on that, there's always room for change, new yarns, whether it's, you know, changing weaving techniques or improving production, or even changing a finishing process. There's always things to investigate and to try and develop the product that you have. Design also extremely important. And I think from the slides that you showed earlier, Brian, you can see Christopher Kane, Jonathan Saunders, Graham Black, there's Holly Fulton, that's just a few names, but all coming out of Scotland, and there's great schools of textiles within Scotland that are producing that talent. And then those companies who may not be based in Scotland anymore, they're in London or New York or in other cities, they're still looking to Scottish designers to work with them and to mills, because they love the excuse to, you know, go back to their roots and work with mills that are where they're from, essentially. So yeah, I think we've got some great design talent, and hopefully we're continuing to improve.
And it is true, every one of those designers has done a Scottish collection. They've all wanted to go back and represent their country. So Brian, to you, as a true expert on the symbol of our national identity, tartan, the world loves tartan. Why do you think that is, and do you see it continuing more or less forever?
Yes, and I think everybody here hopes that that is the case. For years, I've been hoping that a graduate is going to come and knock on our door and saying, I want to do a dissertation on the psychology of tartan, because we would welcome them with open arms. There are so many facets to the attraction of tartan. In my office, I have a small piece of tartan that has been down onto the surface of the moon and brought back to Earth, and we have it, and that typifies it. That typifies the deep roots that overseas Scots nourish with the home country. That was taken onto the moon by Commander Alan Bean on Apollo 12 in 1969. Now that was one of the, or is not one of the, it is the greatest journey ever undertaken by man. And how did he celebrate stepping onto the moon? He had a piece of his clan tartan with him. So that covers the historic side, and there's some 40 million Scots, or 40 million people of Scots descent, to be more accurate, around the world. And very many of them, for them, the tie, and the visible tie, the emotional tie with the home country is tartan. But really, I think that's not the market we're looking at the moment. We're looking at the fashion market. And this is why a really good study of the psychology of tartan would be extremely interesting. The Scots have this long-standing, swashbuckling image, you will see today the remnants of Scottish Highlanders who've fought down through the centuries, walking down some streets in Scotland. They still wear the dress that is immediately recognizable. And you can't say this about very many of the other great warrior figures of the world. The Highlander is still here. And if one looks at the films, Brian mentioned Braveheart, pure fiction, but marvelous. Please let's have more of them, because they do a tremendous job. And then one of the other very important ones, and something that's particularly important to me from a tartan designing point of view, is that tartan is a unique identifier. Tartan is not just a fabric design. It's something that has soul. It's something that has an identity. It allows people around the world to unite under a common flag, as it were. Now, corporate tartans, there are more and more corporate tartans around these days, and it's very appropriate that being in New York at the moment, that I just show a leg and say, there's Brooks Brothers for you. Saks have one, and a recent one that's just been completed has been for the YMCA. The YMCA are in 120 countries, and they have 45 million members. They look upon that tartan as a global identifier. There's a lot of blue in it, and not giving you the complete story of the tartan, but that blue represents the oceans which unite those 120 countries and those 45 million members. So there's a marvelous example of how tartan can be used. At the other end of the scale, it signifies non-conformism. It signifies rebellion. If you think of many of the pop groups, how did they show their dissatisfaction with society? They dressed in very strange habits, and frequently they employed tartan. And if anybody is familiar with what we call the Tartan Army, which is the huge number of followers of the Scottish football team, I don't know why they bother following them. They could sit at home and watch them lose. But tartan is their identifier. And of course, the promotional value of that is enormous. And slipping back to Brooks Brothers, they've just printed over 500,000 shopping bags with this tartan on. And they're not just floating up and down Fifth Avenue and Madison. They're in various places around the world. So all the time, the love of tartan is being fed, and it is the most remarkably flexible design. Brian mentioned we have something like 5,000 tartans on our database. It's very difficult to inadvertently design one tartan that's exactly the same as the other. So we've got enough for another 500 years, at least, enough scope for more new tartans.
Okay,
So,
great, Brian. That should cover Brooks Brothers for the next few generations.
yes, well,
Yep.
they've done us proud. We ought to,
What technology? Yep.
recognise it.
So, Alan, Harris Tweed probably exemplifies the heritage and the tradition and the real iconic nature of Scottish textiles, as we've seen. What are the special features of the Harris Tweed?
Well, you made a comment about the couple falling in love. Well, I went to Harris and Lewis, and I fell in love with Harris Tweed. Extraordinary, extraordinary. Excuse me. There is Wendy, you may have noticed on the film that there was a sign on a piece of machinery, 1892. That's in our mill, working. Wendy, I sat next to her at breakfast, and she told me about these looms that they had bought. And then she told me about the engineer, local engineer, said, wouldn't it be fun to fix those up and mechanize them to a computer-aided design? Well, that's what I love about the island. it is an island community. We have old machinery. One of the most important groups is mechanical engineers. And it was fascinating to me yesterday listening to the watchmakers, because mechanical engineers don't exist that frequently because everything's electronic. So what are the special features? It is an industry. Going to the island is like walking into a time warp. The people, the environment, it's very, very special in and of itself. I have a book outside that anybody would like to look at. The shibboleth for Harris Tweed is "From the land comes the cloth." If you look at the book, you will really see the translation of the landscape into the actual tweed. One of the things about the tweed that I learned a lot on my first visit to the mill after we had invested. Our designer was standing at a table with tweezers. He was unpicking, reverse engineering the yarn. Because yarn, the tweed is made according to a recipe. And if you don't know the ingredients and the quantities, you don't get it right. And we had to take over from a mill that had ceased to function, that was the major supplier to the world market. And people were bringing us their tweeds to replicate. We couldn't do that without knowing the recipe. So that was fascinating to me. Each piece of yarn can have up to 8 different colors in it, and that's what gives you the rich feeling. And I brought with me a jeweler's loop so that you can actually look at the yarn and see for yourself under the loop how that is made. The other special thing that we have going for us is that the forebears on the island, very astutely in 1911, decided that they needed to trademark and brand this. And they got the Harris Tweed brand made real by an act of the British Parliament. So an act of Parliament actually established the brand and the conditions under which the brand can be used. It has to be hand woven on the island, pure virgin wool, and it has to meet certain criteria in order to be stamped, as you saw in the film, as Harris Tweed. So that was hugely, hugely important. The Harris Tweed Authority was set up, and I think, sadly, Bryans didn't have the same benefits. It was set up so that the mills paid the authority a stamping charge. To have every meter of our cloth stamped with the orb, we pay them a charge which allows them both to protect the brand and also market and promote it. So those are, along with all the other characteristics that have been mentioned as part of our heritage, those go with Harris Tweed in spades.
Great, Alan, thanks. I'm conscious of the time, and we do want to ask for some questions from the audience. So, and the answers, if it could be, now that we've all expressed something, could be a little briefer on the answers. So for Wendy, how can international designers work with Scottish mills for a bespoke solution?
This is actually quite an interesting one, because sometimes when we meet new designers, they internationally, and we're in Scotland, they wonder how we can collaborate because of the distance, basically. But now what I've been doing for the past 3 or 4 weeks is visiting different designers in the States and telling them how, although we work with 100-year-old looms, we now have access to the looms, as Alan mentioned, from our CAD system. So we can work through email, basically with images, and we do quite a lot with designers will send us, a mood board or an architectural reference of a building that they're working on, if it's for interiors, or if it's a fashion collection, the image board that's going with the collection. And we can then take elements of that directly from what they've sent us, put it into our system that then feeds directly down to the loom. So you've got, something really modern, such as email, which we've not had for very long because we're quite remote. But you get something emailed to you that then can be sampled on a 100-year-old loom within a few days. And, a lot of designers, I would say probably 40% of our work now is bespoke, commissioned, whether it's for brands, luxury interiors brands, or for smaller projects such as, you know, for say a hotel, a boutique hotel, they want something that reflects the original building, so we can replicate an architectural reference like I mentioned. Or we do quite a lot of work for museums where they might have an archived image or piece of fabric that we can then replicate that was originally lace or similar. So I think, you know, it's easy to work directly with the Scottish mills. I think all the mills are very good at communicating, and they, you know, for us it's great to work with other designers and companies, because they're bringing their knowledge and their expertise, and we're bringing our technical expertise, and then you can make something that's completely unique. So I hope that answered the question.
And a great example of really modern communication technology, allowing old traditional heritage.
Sorry, can I just add something as well to that?
Of course.
Thanks, Wendy. No, just to add that, that as kind of groups of companies, we find that collaboration is hugely important and stimulating. On that note, I'd just like to bring to your attention that there's a Scottish company called Atelier, who is a pop-up shop here in New York at the moment, and they have worked with a lot of Scottish companies and manufacturers and artists across textiles and leathers to produce a really nice portfolio of artistic fabrics. And they're on display for the month of December at the Artist Institute at 163 Eldridge Street. And if anyone's available this Monday night at 7 o'clock, Penny Martin from the Gentlewoman magazine, who I think is the senior editor, is there for a question and answers session. So if anyone would like any further information, then please kind of grab me to a certain extent at lunchtime. Thanks. Sorry, thanks, Brian.
No, very good. For John and Dougal, Italy is our competition for our fabrics and textiles. How do Scottish wovens textiles differentiate versus Italian, Dougal?
This is an interesting question, because, of course, the Italians, companies such as Loro Piana and Zegna, have done amazingly well across the world over the last 20 years. And sadly, the Scottish woolen industry in the last 50 years has gone from having about 120 members of the Scottish Woolen Manufacturers Association to around 10 that are active mills today, maybe a little more. But I think there's one key issue here. The sort of cloths that the Italians make, for the most part, are worsted cloths. The Scottish textile industry was born and grew on woolen textiles. The distinction there being that worsted textiles have a process prior to spinning called combing, where the fibers are laid parallel to each other by a series of combing operations. And this creates a smooth, lightweight yarn, and then becomes a smooth, lightweight fabric, more suitable for suitings the world over, indeed even tropical suitings in the sort of 7-8 ounce weight, as opposed to the heavier woolen type cloths that Scotland is so famous for, which are absolutely wonderful and rich, but for the most part are not well received in the sort of climatic conditions that we find the world over today, especially with temperatures getting warmer, and also people enjoying universally central heating the world over where necessary. So that's one really important part. The Italian textile industry, of course, has some woolen as well. The other thing is color. Italy is a wonderfully bright climate. You go to Como, you go to Biella, the sun's shining like it is today here in New York. Probably not as cold in Biella or Como as it is here today. I think color has successfully played a big part in the Italian growth over the last few years. It's not that the Scots don't have color, and we do. As was beautifully shown in the Carloway Mill movie, I mean, when you put into one yarn can be 15 or 20 colors in those hanks of wool going into the mixer there. Quite extraordinary. And it's only through the introduction of color and the melanges that are created that we can create a cloth like that. And that's done most beautifully in woolen cloths rather than worsted cloths, I might add. So I think there's distinct differences. But we don't want to be Italy. We don't need to be Italy. Yes, I think it's a good thing to have lighter weight cloths, softer cloths, and I think we're moving in that direction. In the cashmere industry, we're certainly the equal of Italy. There's no question of that. The sort of cloths that are made by John's company, Alex Begg, are fantastic, beautiful cloths. The doeskin cashmere finishes and so on, magnificent. Maybe it's a coincidence that today in the knitwear industry, to change gear just for a moment, the knitwear industry, many of the great knitwear companies that were started sort of going into decline in Scotland in the 1960s are now owned as fashion brands by Italians and by other overseas companies, because we'll come back to the heritage, because they love the authentic heritage of the names. And that's a key, and it's not just the names, it's what they represent. Holland and Sherry, my company, as merchants, we sort of, going back to the worsted woolen thing, we have 6,000 cloths that are in stock. So we do have lots of cloths that are made in Scotland, we have cloths that are made in England, we have tartans, beautiful tartans, such as these. The point is that we have the ability to be adaptable, to have variety, to have versatility. Those are three of my favorite words in the textile industry. Whether it's what you're doing yourself through your design and innovation, or in response to customers.
Dougal, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
But we're going to have to break shortly for it.
All right, let me finish one thing.
Okay.
Key is the Italians are brilliant at marketing themselves. Invite your customers to visit your beautiful mills and see the hills, drink the whiskey, hear the pipes, wear the tartan, and market what we're really good at ourselves, not what somebody else is good at. That's the message.
Very good. I told you we were shy in retiring. People. So maybe if we could just have quick fire answers to the rest of the questions.
Just
Kashmir, John.
Yeah, sorry, on the cashmere front, just to follow up from Dougal, we make some very fine cashmeres now, and we find that, yes, the Italians are phenomenally good at what they do, but as Dougal says, we're not Italy and we offer something different. What I'm going to do just quickly is have an X Factor moment. Don't worry, I'm not going to croon the Proclaimers at you or Rod Stewart. What I'd like to do is just show you a couple of qualities that we produce that are hugely innovative and an example of the future direction for a lot of Scottish textiles. We use a lot of worsted wools. We use a lot of wool that's generally used in knitting, so it's very difficult to weave with. These two examples are some sort of recent innovations, just to show you the type of quality we're doing. I'll just pop down and pass these round if you wouldn't mind. First one's 100% cashmere. It's a nuance effect that uses a single thread, which is 2 kilometres long, and the single thread is dyed for the length of the 2 kilometres. Okay, the second quality here we call wispy, is the finest cashmere product available in the market. Okay, 100% cashmere, incredibly fine, and obviously keeping the Scottish theme going, an ancient black watch. So if you wouldn't mind, I'll just pop these down, you can just have a quick feel.
You can see that John works at the weekends at a market. So just quickly moving on, just quick fire answers. Brian, what's your favourite tartan?
I think since I'm in New York, it's got to be the New York City tartan. This started life very many years ago with a different name called Tunes of Glory. After the Twin Tower disaster, Mayor Giuliano asked the Scottish weavers, Loch Carron, if they would rename the tartan. They renamed it the New York City tartan, and into it they designed 2 black lines.
Last question for the panel. Alan, can the Harris tweet be copied?
No. Well, it can be copied, but not legitimately because of the Act of Parliament. If you're not weaving it in accordance with the dictates of the Act of Parliament, it's not Harris tweet.
Great. So with that, I know we're way over time, so we're just going to take a couple of questions if you have them from the audience. Yes. Kate.
Hi guys. You mentioned two things that are very important to making the Scottish textiles more popular, which is business approach and design. However, when you look at the education and all sort of organizations that are supporting design, there is very rarely the mix with the business. Most of the time, it's not done very well. What's your opinion on this, and do you think that should be sort of blended together, even though the design students usually do not like to learn business?
Wendy? Would you like
Yeah,
to-
please.
I totally agree with you. I attended Glasgow School of Art to do my woven textiles degree, and the idea behind the degree was that you are free reign. You know, you're a designer and you should be designing, and it was a fantastic 4 years, brilliant. But when I came out of art school, having very little business training within that degree, I think then to come and work in a mill where, you know, designing is one part of it, as you said, but business and marketing especially, and how you promote your products, that, you know, you have to, luckily I done a marketing degree before my art school degree, but not everyone has done that. So I think definitely to have some business teaching with the design, because they go hand in hand, whether you work for yourself or for a mill or for for any sort of textiles company, for any company, I suppose.
And to be honest with you, it's quite a key issue, and we have been speaking regularly with academia to try and improve the kind of general business knowledge of the students coming through. But, you know, as Wendy's pointing out, quite a lot of the designers, they're there because they're creative, and although there's business electives, they tend to shy away from them, which is a shame.
Okay, just one last question.
Do you want, as a fabric editor, I understand Harris Tweed, I know the field from just the name. However, do you want to do a more tropic weight, not as fine as the Italians as a tropic wool, but would you want to do a more tropic or lightweight Harris Tweed and still know that it's Harris? Is it hot? Could you do it? Do you want to do it?
Alan?
Well, we've had long arguments on that very subject. Interestingly enough, when I started the company, I had a field test, a Laura Piano blended Harris Tweed and cashmere, our traditional weight cashmere and our new featherweight cashmere. Laura Piano won hands down, 70%. Over 1,000 people felt it. That was their favorite. But what they did say, don't get rid of the traditional. We want to keep that. The Act of Parliament does allow us actually to do a single weave, which would allow it to be lighter, and we can go with the merino wool. So we're experimenting with that at the moment.
So with that, we're going to have to bring this to a close. I'm sure you've heard from all of us that in Scottish Textiles we have the heritage, we have the stories, we have the tales, we have the passion. And as you've heard from this wonderful group of panellists, we have the enthusiasm to really grow and develop our business. So thanks for listening to us.
Monday?
Sorry?
He's going to be there Monday night?
No, I'm not, unfortunately. Oh, you're on my way.